Some TV showrunners are banning rape as a plot device on their shows. So TV critic Maureen Ryan, she interviewed a number of different showrunners on the popular plot device for Variety. And what she described in the articles, it sounds like that a number of the writers, the showrunners, first of all, we should probably talk about what a showrunner is. A showrunner, they're the head writer? Is that how you would say it? Executive producer?
No, they're the
developer?
showrunner. So the showrunner is the person who is responsible ultimately for the arc of the show, what it does, its main decision. You can have a head writer. Everyone at the top level pretty much has the title on the end at the end of the show, executive producer. But there can be 15 executive producers, but only 1 or 2 showrunners.
But some showrunners are also the writer, right?
Shonda Rhimes.
Yeah,
all of
exactly.
Them. All
okay,
of
that's
them
what I said. Yeah.
But it's not the head writer. Like, it's stupid. There's a lot of stuff. The showrunner, like, you can have a head writer who pens fucking everything.
Right.
Or is in charge of assigning writers and everything. But the showrunner is the person that they bring on. And you can have one showrunner who's the runner of 3 shows, but who's like, I am ultimately responsible for what this show does.
Right, but they're writers. I want people to understand that, because when it comes to like the specs of these scripts and why we'll get into the article and why they have such a big say, not only are they in charge of the show, but they also tend to be writers and the ones that created the show.
Like, not
Sometimes,
necessarily. So
yeah.
the way it works is, like, they were a writer. They probably, the writers of the big shows that you know now were probably all writers at one point on, like, The Simpsons or something like that. And they made their way up. As they made their way up, they spent less time writing and more time being responsible for the creative vision of the show, to the point where they get to be showrunners. Now they run the show.
A good analogy would be like the coach of a team, the one that draws up the plays, and then the players, maybe the writers, would be the ones that would execute it. But then not the same as like the manager of a team or the owner of a team. That could be like executive producers.
Yeah, I get all that.
Okay.
I just wanted it to be very clear that they're writers, because I want people to understand why they have such a say in the expertise of creating a script, and how they are now criticizing why other writers are using rape as a plot device. So I thought it was really important for people to understand why showrunners, at least in this article, have that level of expertise. So they do have this writing background, or they're still currently writing. So here, Jeremy Slater, who is currently heading Fox's TV revival of The Exorcist, Jeremy says, one of my hard and fast rules when reading spec scripts was, the second that there was a rape that was used for shock value and that didn't have any sort of narrative purpose, I threw the script aside, and I was shocked by the number that had that. In fact, he said that like of 200 spec scripts that he gets, the majority, or a portion, 30 to 40 is actually what he said, will have a rape scene specifically for, he said, shock value. Another writer had chimed in the interview and said, or they'll use it as like a very lazy way to establish some traumatic backstory for the female character. And so a number of them are taking a stand against this, unless it like pushes like a really specific narrative. So another showrunner, Brian Fuller of American Gods, he said when he worked on Hannibal that they had this no rule that they would have these explicit rape scenes. He goes on to say, I personally think that it stains a story in a way, and that it prevents you from being able to celebrate different aspects of sexuality. America as a country has a very fucked up attitude regarding sex and sexuality, so there is something troubling about the punishing of characters for their sex and sexuality. And then he goes on to say that as a gay man, his awareness of assault as a reality people face every day makes it difficult for him to explore in a single episode in television as a full experience. He says it's hard for him to evaluate that as entertainment. I think that's really interesting. So do you guys agree with these specific showrunners in the article?
Yes, absolutely. I don't think rape should ever be used as a vehicle for entertainment value, because you have people who, I put myself in the shoes of someone who was raped, watching the show where, and I think in the article he said that about there was about men using it as a way to have power. That would be really disturbing for me, especially because 33% of people that are raped contemplate suicide, and then 13% of people who are raped actually attempt suicide. Wow. So seeing that on television everywhere is kind of forcing people to relive such a traumatic experience, And he also said in the article that they use it as a scapegoat because it elicits shock value for the audience, and it's just kind of sickening. Don't you think, Sam?
I agree with you. I like that they were very poignant in the fact that if it's specific and it pushes a narrative that's essential to the story, and they said it's hard to do that sometimes in one full episode, but for shock value and for the laziness of just trying to establish some backstory, they think that is ineffective and not right.
It's just too easy.
Yeah.
Like, for something as hard for everyone involved to cope with, rape as a plot device is just too easy. It's because they sit there and like, all right, we need a life-changing event that, scars this person for a long time and establishes the power of someone over someone else. Rape, that does that. All right, let's do it. It's crazy. It's, we're do it, just write it. But there are so many, especially if you like have a background in performance, like there's so many more interesting ways to do that as a writer. That's a challenge that you have to overcome. Not just something you can write, rape, let's move on. We also get a sex scene in there, that's ratings. It's just wrong to do. It's also, if all these writers look around at each other and they all know from experience that rape's just an easy thing, a lazy thing. And comedians too, I imagine. It's like, that rape joke, that was just so easy. You did it for a reaction. Why didn't you write like a better joke?
That's a good point.
But I can't say ultimately like we can never do it.
Oh,
Sometimes,
yeah.
Like other then you
And
run the risk of having like
either.
sweeping it under the rug.
Right, and they didn't say that either. I'm sure at some points it's a good way to really address how somebody can deal with that and overcome it, and how horrific it is. And I'm sure there's plots where it really drives that part home.
I think it's really obvious when a story about sexual assault or a storyline that deals with sexual assault is dealt with in a meaningful and thoughtful way. And I think those are the storylines that we probably aren't even thinking of right now because they don't feel like a plot device. They felt like something that happened in the story that these characters dealt with. It just became part of the show. But I can think of examples now of shows where sexual assault or harassment or rape has been used in a way that was so obviously a plot device, so obviously so easy that didn't really fit with the story. And I think that that's sort of the litmus test for me. It would be if it fits well with the story, if it seems like the writers made a choice about this, or if it was like, this guy needs to know that he needs to step up and protect this girl. What's a good way for him to wake up and realize that? Oh, what if she's raped in Tijuana or something like that?
You're saying if it's organic within the
yeah, and so I think there is a way to do it, and it shouldn't be an off-limits story arc at all. And it's important to talk about it, because rape is a thing that people go through.
I remember a episode, and this is going to A, date me, and B, but it was on 90210. But sometimes 90210, the original 90210.
The reboot.
And no, it was
No, it was
not the
I
original.
remember what you're talking about. It was the original.
It was the original 90210, and they would address things on there like eating disorders and date rape and things like that. And for like a young teen who was watching the show, it would, in a way, it would teach me, wow, like that happens, and what is consent? And she said no, yet now he's had sex with her, yet now she's not constituting it as rape, but then she does by the end of the episode. And in a way, it taught me what consent is, because sometimes that can be a blurred line when you're a teenager and you don't. And so I think it's like, I remember I learned what date rape was based on that episode.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a powerful way to communicate that.
The show Girls had that one scene where Adam and Sherry Appleby, I think it is, his like new girlfriend, he's like a little too forceful, but it's like this weird thing that happens in relationships where it's like, I want to try this thing and she's not into it, but there's like this weird line of like, do I do it because he's my boyfriend, or do I say no because like, and you're just like, oh, this gives me the opportunity as a viewer to if someone's been through that experience, identify with it, and then just think about it, because it's something that happens that a lot of us haven't put a very fine point on.
Exactly.
But then you look at Game of Thrones, they got in trouble because it's like their daughter's dead, or someone's dead, and he's like, now I'm gonna rape my sister. Like it's a little too much.
I think Game of Thrones is always too much.
All the time.
All the time.
I don't think it's always too much, but yes.
Always too much.
Those rapes, there's a lot of frickin' rapes, and I get it.
And deaths and everything else on Game of Thrones. I think writers
like it.
But that's, but subscription television, you can do that. Netflix, HBO, and I think they're becoming even more a little careless with storylines of that nature, because I watch shows like Power on, again, subscription television, where they pull out all the stops to throw in like curse words and just explicit sex and these things like that. Also want to say just, a lot of people have this misconception that men are not victims of date rape at all.
I'm so happy you
men
said
are.
this. Yes.
And the LGBT community writer in the article made a good point that, we see assault a lot more than, I wouldn't say maybe straight couples do, but we're targeted, especially in Los Angeles, being part of the LGBT community. So yes, men can also be victims of date rape and rape in general.
100%.
Yeah.
Victims of sexual assault,
Yeah.
rape, 100%.
And back to what you said about Game of Thrones getting, going over the top, and then all the subscription services. I think there's more responsibility on Game of Thrones and shows of that caliber, where if those ones who do set the bar for a lot of us in terms of what I consider really great television, if they've had a lot of rapes this last couple seasons, and if they start straying, then other people will just gravitate toward, that's a very easy plot device I can adapt and put in my show. And now you see like the birth of all these shows that look like Game of Thrones. You got Vikings, they had Spartacus, like all those other shows that follow suit.
Or shows that just have the same reach and the same sort of quality to them that Game of Thrones has. I think Game of Thrones did set a new standard for what we can expect for television shows. And so to see them, especially in the recent seasons, just straying, and I do think that some of the rapes that have existed on the show have been lazy plot development points or just there for a shock of like, oh wow, this character went through this, this power trip. That is disappointing because again, if they are at the top echelon of these really top tier shows, what is that saying for the lesser shows that maybe don't have as big of a budget, don't have these as experienced writers, and now they're looking for a plot device or to extend a narrative, and then they're like, well, Game of Thrones did this, why don't we try out this? It is lazy.
Or a
Final
network
thought that we
producer,
have to go.
or a network producer swoops in and goes, Game of Thrones got rape, put more rape in there.
Yeah. Yeah. There's many levels in the industry where they all have their influence control. All right, so please share. I think this is a really important topic. So please share your thoughts. We want to know what you have to say, and we'll see you next time on Pop Sugar.